All right, hello. So my first, really, I kind of say this is my first day in a lot of ways. Been here a little over 2 weeks, and still drinking through a fire hose. Learning what type of city Toronto is, a great city, and what TFC is all about. I'm not going to go. I don't really want to go much about my introduction. I want to answer any question you have. I am really looking forward to building this club and looking forward to, 2016 started the day after we lost to the Impact. Really that was my first day because the team was built before I was here, but I think there's a lot to build on. So from there, we'll start with questions.
Further to that, Bill,
Yeah.
with regards to for you.
Now, John?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Remember the face, yep.
Cool. Further to buildings, what do you see as priority? Where would you like to see this team?
Number one priority, without a doubt, is improving the team defensively. Have to. Can't let up 58 goals and expect to compete for a championship. And I talked to Greg about it yesterday, in fact, had a long meeting with Greg. And, he opened up his notebook, and his number one priority was exactly what I just said. So we need to be a team. If you look at the history of MLS, you have to let up essentially 1.2 goals or less to be a team that can compete for a championship. And I told Greg next year we cannot let up more than 45 goals. And it has to come from the coaching staff. It has to come from our top players. And everyone has to buy in that we need to be a team that can win games 1-0, and we need to be a team that can win games 4-1. Because this team's going to score goals. This team's going to score goals going forward. Have some of the best players in the league in terms of attacking, and obviously with Seba. But that is the number one priority. And it's not even wins and losses. It's goals conceded. Because if you let up less than 45 goals a year, you're going to win a lot of games, especially with this team, with the attacking options we have. Really only been 2 weeks, and I went to the game with Larry Tannenbaum, and I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed as a president and a CEO, and I've been here 2 weeks, so I don't have the connection yet with the players and with the coaching staff. But to go into a big playoff game like that, I think the squad seemed to me a little bit overwhelmed. I think Greg told me, he says, the good thing, and I've gotten to know Greg a little bit here in the last 2 weeks. He says, look, I learned a lesson in that game, and he wasn't making excuses, and that shows me a lot about character. But I was embarrassed, and it's not something that is acceptable for me in terms of going forward. If you have a really good season, and luck of the ball bounces here or there, and you lose a game 2-1, but you had a great season, sometimes that happens, right? But over time, to build a championship contender, you generally don't find yourself on the opposite end of that game. So it was embarrassing.
With that said, I know you.
So what's your name?
Dan.
Dan, okay.
That said, I know you came in and you said you don't foresee making any changes in management or coaching
Yep.
positions. Did that one result change anything in your mind?
No, and I've actually thought about this a lot, and even in the context, I've been getting a ton of calls about Jason Kreis being let go in the last day. I've thought about it. I thought about it a lot, and I thought about the future of this franchise. I thought about the history of this franchise. You've never had a coach, the same coach 2 seasons in a row, that started a season 2 seasons in a row. Greg has coached 44, 45 games, something like that. The team has improved. Essentially over the last 4 years, you went from 23 points to 29 points to 41 points to 49 points, right? We have to be a 50-plus point team. Without a doubt, it's the expectations of owner. It's my expectations. I think Greg deserves the opportunity to continue what they started here. And I thought about it hard. I thought about it really hard. But what I found is he is a student of the game. He's not a fiery coach. He's not a guy that has that, and maybe that's something he can develop. But he's very astute. He knows the game. He knows the personalities of the players. He's learned. He's told me he's learned some things this year that he's going to improve on, and I'm going to look to see that. But I think he deserves the opportunity to continue what he started. If you look at this franchise, really only 6 players played significant minutes this year in 15 that did in 14. Ashton Morgan, Jackson, Joe Bendick, Justin Morrow, Michael Bradley, and there was one, Jonathan Osorio. They're really the only 6 players that played a lot of minutes in 14 and again in 15. We're going to have a much larger group of players that played this year that are going to play again next year. Do we have to improve some slots? Absolutely. But I think Greg deserves the opportunity. And he wants to prove that he can build this team into a championship contender, and I'm going to give him that. So hopefully that got the Jason questions out of the way. Yeah, no, please. Yeah.
I mean, Jason is who he is.
Yep.
There's a track record of success there. Why not at least have a
I'm going to give you a good story because I thought about this. So I joined RSL in 2008, April of 2008, and I had a coach who had coached 2/3 of the season in 2007 and maybe 5 games in 2008. We finished 10-10-10. RSL fans were screaming for his head. They wanted Jason out. We actually wound up going to a conference championship game, and I liked Jason a lot. I thought he had the tools to be a really good coach. The next year, we wound up 11-12-7. By all, outward-looking projections, we underperformed based on some of the talent we had, but I felt we were building something. Fans were screaming for Jason Kreis's head. I should have fired him, and the guy has no experience, and he's too stubborn, and he's bad tactically. All this stuff. Wound up winning a championship. And so, sometimes it's easy to say fire someone, get rid of someone. But had I fired Jason Kreis in 2008 or even midway through 2009, when we actually were 3 games under 500 at one point, RSL wouldn't have had the history they had. And so I look at this scenario, and I find myself in a very similar scenario, and I say, you know what, he deserves the opportunity to continue. And look, if we don't get where we want to be going forward, then you look at options. But I like to think that with another season, with the group that we've built, and fine tuning it a bit, I think Greg can be a very good coach in this league. And so I see a lot of similarities there, different personality types, but in terms of tactical awareness of the game, and I think Greg will say he learned some things about the MLS competition this year. They do have some similarities, and so it worked out for me once not firing a coach who had a losing record or a 500 record, and that's why. But like I said earlier, I did think about it. I thought about it a lot, and that's where I come out though. Jason will not have a problem getting a job.
No, I don't.
Yeah, he's an excellent coach. I talked to him last night. The toughest thing is he got 1 year, and I think that's really difficult. And I thought about it for Greg. Greg's coached 44 games. He's essentially coached one season and 10 games. It's not enough. It's not enough time, and especially when we've seen improvement, right? So you've seen improvement. So I don't think it's enough time. And the hard part for Jason is his wife Kim, and he's got 2 young boys, and that's always tough. So I told him, take your time. He'll be fine.
Do you think, it's Kurt Larson?
Kurt, yeah.
Do you think New York City's going to regret that? Do you think a coach that early, a coach that you used?
I do. I think Jason wasn't allowed the time to build what he wanted to build. It's always difficult to have a coach for 1 season. I actually really look at 3 years. Over the course of 3 years, and I saw it with Jason's development at RSL, a coach is really allowed to make the team his own. I think, Red Bulls, for example, they fired a popular coach in Mike Petke, but the Red Bulls actually had a really good foundation of players. They had been 50-plus points, I want to say, 3 or 4 years in a row. I think they had 49 points 5 years ago. So they kind of had a good group of players, and then they maybe the missing ingredient they had was the coach. New York City doesn't have a track record, so I was disappointed to see that they didn't give Jason the time that he needed. And then again, I look back at TFC, and I say, what has Greg done wrong in terms of statistically where we are as a team to not deserve to move forward? And I couldn't come up with an answer. You know, you can look at the blowout, obviously, in the playoff game, but I don't think one game should decide that.
Bill, you have a unique set of talent with your three DPs. Some have wondered whether the team has been able to get the most out of them on the field.
Yep.
Getting Josie and Sebastian meshing together.
Yep.
Michael is a unique talent
Yep.
who can do many things, and the team's tried to build around it. Do you think that more work is needed to be done to get the system that gets the most out of those three?
Yeah, you know, and Greg actually laid out a plan for me yesterday to connect that better. One of the things he said is he felt that Josie and Seba did not connect enough, and it was more Josie becoming more comfortable with who he is. And really, Seba is a player, you almost just give him the freedom, right? You give him the freedom to do what he's going to do, and he's going to be spectacular at times. We had a player like that at RSL named Javi Morales. Everything revolved around Javi, and we had role players, Ned Grabavoy, we had Andy Williams at the time, Will Johnson, and wherever Javi went, whether he went to the left, sometimes he drifted all the way outside to the right, to the left. You know, Seba likes to drift sometimes to the outsides. The other players knew where to slot. They knew where to slot, right? You know, I think what Greg is saying, he's really going to work with Josie on being a box striker, a classic number 9, because he's going to get the ball. And, you know, if you look at the goal you scored in the playoff game, there was a classic goal with Seba beating the guys down the left side, Josie scoring a head ball in the net, and he's a big, strong kid. He's going to be, you know, he's 25, 26 years old. So I think what Greg wants to do is make him comfortable with where he's playing and to maximize his assets that he has. And I think Seba, you just let Seba do what he does, and then the team works around that. So Greg, he kind of laid out a little plan of how he sees this team evolving on the pitch with the talent that we have. You know, Michael's work rate is obviously second to none, and he's a gamer. You know, so certainly look forward to you know, obviously have those 3 guys and see how we can maximize them. But, you know, from a statistical standpoint, they all did pretty good. And you know, it's not just 3 players to make a team, though. You need 11. And like I said to John's earlier question, I don't think attacking is our issue. It's on the defensive side of the ball.
And, sorry, as you know, there's been, with the Blue Jays, there's been a lot of talk recently about presidents and general managers. Now you are president. Does Tim Bezbatchenko's role change in any way? I assume it does, since you're his boss.
Yes and no. So Tim, I think, was thrown into the fire a little bit and had to deal with a lot of different things that were outside of what I would say just soccer. And what I've asked of Tim is, I said, look, I just want you to focus on the soccer team. I want you to focus on our scouting. I want you to focus on our analytics. I want you to focus on our player personnel. You know, yesterday when he and I and Greg met and we talked about, you know, what type of personnel we're looking at to improve the team, Tim, that's your job. Let's go out and get it. And Greg, and I always like a head coach to be very involved in those discussions as well. I mean, one of the nice things I found is Greg was very involved in the identification of Seba. And I think that's really important, because I'm very much a believer is you have to have your GM and your coach. They can disagree, and then you table it. But if we're going to do things, they got to agree. Very difficult for a GM to push down on a head coach or vice versa. So Tim, I want to focus on just soccer. And I think for him, you know, he's a little more fiery than Greg is, and he gets pretty intense. But you know, he's played the game, and I think has a good mind for the game and has a good vision. And I want to give him the tools to be successful. And look, what I can add is I add experience. You know, I had 20+ years of experience in sports, and certainly I'm going to be involved on the soccer side, but I'm also going to, you know, be involved on the business side and the stadium side, and overseeing the whole TFC brand essentially and our operation.
Bill's kind of a 2-part question is, when do you expect those stadium renovations to be done next season? So how many games on the road?
Yeah.
And then knowing that the team's going to start, whatever, 6 to 10 games on the road, how do you have, what kind of leash is there on this staff?
We talked about this yesterday too. So it looks like 8 games. It looks like the is it the first weekend of May? I think it is, right? The first weekend of May that we'll likely get our first home game, if not the second weekend of May. What I told Greg is 8 points in 8 games. So you look at setting that as the mark, right? Because it's going to be difficult. We may be 2-4-2. You know, I mean, that's 8 points though. And then your next 9 games to the halfway point, you're looking at, you know, making up some ground and averaging probably 2 points a game. So 18 points. So you're sitting at the halfway mark at probably, you know, 26 points, 27 points, which is, I think, good enough. And so I always liked him. What we used to do at RSL, we used to break the season down into 4s. And sometimes even when we had CONCACAF, we'd break them down to increments of 5. And we'd set goals. And, you know, it's something that I think Greg wants to do going forward this year. They didn't do it last year, he said, the first 7 games on the roll, on the road. But this year, the first 8 games on the road, we want to set some benchmarks on where we want to be.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that seems like you're basically, it's a lot of pressure from the coach to demand.
Comes with the job. You know, yeah, we all have the pressure. I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with setting goals, and you know, I mean, here's what I do know about TFC and my discussions with ownership is this organization wants to win, and they've made the investments in these players, like Neil pointed out, that we should be a team that competes for a championship year in and year out. You're not going to win it every year, but as long as you're in that conversation and you're in that mix, and that's what we have to build here. Can we do it next year? I like to think we can. We still need to see, you know, the pieces that we add. But that is where we want to get to. And now, with that, as said earlier, you know, 50-plus points is where we need to be. And so I would say if we take a step backwards, that's a difficult situation, right, to look at. But I think pressure comes with the job.